Thank you all for coming to today's React workshop with Canva. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered here today. So today we are joined with Jessica and Nathan from Canva. Before we start, I'd like to give a quick intro to our club, and I'd also like give a quick intro to Monash Associated with Coding, which we call MAC for short. So we're a coding club that focuses on imparting valuable technical skills and industry relevant experiences to students. Our ultimate goal is to foster the programming culture at Monash and provide a collaborative setting for students to do projects and learn from one another. We do this by delivering technical workshops, and what sets us apart is that everything we do produces a result at the end of the day and adds value. Please don't forget to check us out on our social media, which we will share in the chat. So I'll start by handing it over to Jessica, who will do a quick introduction to herself and also to Canva.
Thanks, Roy, and thank you for the lo-fi beats, Anna. That definitely brought me into the event mood. All right, I'm just gonna, can everyone see my screen? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
We can.
And does it change?
Yes.
Oh, off to a great start. Hello, everyone. My name is Jess. I'm the University Programs Manager at Canva. And tonight I am joined by Nathan Ellis, our in-house React guru. No pressure, but thank you so much for taking the time to come along tonight. I know uni is super crazy at the moment, so it's really cool to see everyone really prioritizing their learning and their drive to achieve excellence, and just coming together to learn a little bit about Canva as well. So if you haven't heard of us before, we are an online design tool empowering over 50 million monthly active users. So whether you're designing your next TikTok video, Instagram story, pitch deck, there's bound to be a template for you. Although prior to Canva, the usual way of creating good design was quite complex. You had to purchase Adobe, study design for 3 to 4 years, purchase and download stock photos, purchase layouts, slice images, finally to be able to prepare it for web and print, to then review it about a dozen or so times. It really wasn't possible for small businesses and the likes of uni students who wanted simple, quick, beautiful designs. And so that's why Canva was born. We wanted to build a tool that you're able to collaborate online, have one-click access to Pro Tools, library of millions of images, and really be able to publish anything, anywhere. A lesson that we took away from 2020 was the importance of visual communication. So that became Canva's focus. We wanted to continue to empower small businesses to reach their users throughout the turbulent year that was 2020. And Canva's achieved quite a lot today, but in the words of our CEO and founder, Melanie Perkins, we're only 1% of the way there. So beyond creating a design tool, what is Canva's North Star? What's our purpose to be here? Our mission is to empower the world to design. That breaks down to being empowering absolutely everyone to design anything with every ingredient in every language on every device with the best team in the world. A little flashback to Canva's early days. This is Mel and Cliff in Mel's mum's living room when Canva was just born. It was founded in Sydney, Australia, and in its first year had over 750,000 users. Flash forward to today, and we are over 1,000 Canvanauts in offices and home offices around the world, and are valued at $6 billion US. Now, to achieve our mission, our crazy big goal of empowering the world to design, we need our people to grow, thrive, and do the best work of their lives. And to guide us are our values. So our values are at the heart of everything we do. They're the spirit behind every action and intention here at Canva, helping us create a workplace where everyone can thrive. So no matter what your role is, where you're based, or what your goals are, our values act as a universal guide to help you do the best work of your life at Canva. So I'm just going to share with you a quick video that takes you through our 6 values.
Where do you want me to look?
Wait, I'm not ready.
I'm camera conscious. So. Hey. Do you know the purpose of this?
I have no idea what's going on. And action.
How would you describe that?
The culture at Canva is
all about creating a strong sense of belonging.
At an organisation like this, culture kind of binds people together and helps them move in a certain direction. It's probably the most cliche thing to say, but it always comes back to the people and the vibe around it.
I really enjoy coming into work every day because all my friends are here. Feels like I'm at uni when I'm doing something really nice for the world.
What are the values?
Our values, I think, set us apart.
The thing that struck me the most when I first came in here was the values.
Everything we do as the Vibe team are rooted in Canva's values.
The 6 values that we've got at the moment are be a force for good,
Be a good human, that's super important.
Set crazy big goals and make them happen. Empower others.
Make complex things simple. Let's see.
There's 6 of them, right?
I always forget the 6th one just because there's 6 of them.
And pursue excellence.
That's the one, that's the swim lane one.
Everyone that we hire here in Canva embodies those values.
I've never cared so much about recycling before in my life. I've not encountered any other company who has a value that says be a good human.
At the end of the day, it's about us curating the kind of place where we do the best work of our lives.
So we work hard at Canva, but we sure do take time to celebrate. Whether it's a Steve Jobs party for the iPhone launch, releasing doves off our rooftop in Sydney, open air cinemas, cocktail classes, lawn bowls, picnics, paint and sips, the celebration may change, but the underlying theme stays the same. It's time for everyone to stop, reflect, and celebrate what they've achieved as a team. Now, I've mentioned this sentence a few times, and you may have heard it just in the video we watched. And do the best work of your lives at Canva. But what does that break down to actually mean? So for Canva, it means that everyone should feel recognized, to feel supported, and to be able to bring their whole selves to work and create an environment where everyone belongs and feels included. At Canva, we have a huge responsibility to champion diversity everywhere, across our product, our organization, and our community. As we continue to improve and build on our design tool, we promise to continue holding ourselves accountable for introducing new measures to ensure a more diverse and inclusive platform in the hope of creating lasting change. For our team, it looks like this: to build a team that better represents our community and our world, whilst ensuring that every team member feels like they truly belong at Canva and have equal opportunities here. And we are the first to admit that we have a long way to go, but we're committed to this journey that we're on to becoming a celebration of diversity. So before I hand over to Nathan, I will leave you with this question. Are you ready to do the best work of your life? We offer internship positions over the summer, which include full relocation, including accommodation and flights, completely paid. We also welcome international students, and they are open for front-end engineering, back-end engineering, data science, data analytics, and product design. We also have graduate positions starting every 2 weeks, and other roles opening up almost daily. So thank you for listening. I am now going to hand over to Nathan to talk all things React.
Thank you. I'll just share my other screen. Okay. If no one's shouting in the chat, then I'll assume that it's up. So hi everyone, my name's Nathan, and today I'm going to be giving a bit of a crash course on React, perhaps some new things which hopefully people who haven't learned React before will be able to join in. And if you have learned React before, there might be some new things which you also learn through this workshop as well. Part of this workshop will be going through a bit of a presentation in terms of why we should use React in the first place. And then the second part, we'll be doing a live demo that will hopefully work. And hopefully nothing goes wrong there. Oh, cool. Okay, so firstly, a bit of background. Why am I doing this workshop, or why am I teaching you React? I don't think that I'm necessarily a React guru, but I guess firstly, I was a software engineering graduate from UNSW here in Sydney. I graduated last year, but I actually had quite a few years of experience doing front-end work. But prior to uni, I didn't really know anything about front-end. I didn't really know anything about website development. And my fascination with kind of front-end technology started with a bit of a course which I took at uni in my second year. And I continued that by going through a few different companies and places where I made some projects related to front-end applications. So the first one was I joined a couple of uni startups, mainly creating a chat messenger application as a bit of a summer project to get my foot in the door before reaching some larger companies. I then moved on to a company called Accenture, which I believe has an office in Melbourne as well. I worked there for full time for about 6 months, where I was actually making an editable PowerPoint application, similar to how you would kind of generate a PowerPoint via a website. And then it just so turned out that I interned at Canva the following summer, where I was also involved in the presentations team. So all of this stuff that you're looking at now, when I'm presenting, we kind of own. And there I was making an interactive word clouds. So essentially, people during a presentation would be able to receive some question and answer responses, and then it would display a word cloud kind of image that would change depending on people's responses. I was also given the opportunity to return to Canva after completing my internship, where I'm now working full time, and I'm really enjoying every part of it. I'm part of the presentations team. Here's a little bit of a photo of one of the events that we held last year, and you can see that it's a really awesome team, and you can see them all there. We work on anything that's to do with creating a presentation, publishing a presentation, and so on. If you're interested in finding more about this type of work, I think we have about 15-20 minutes at the end to discuss some of this as well. And if you're interested in how to get involved at Canva, or how to perhaps move more towards front-end work, feel free to reach out to me. My details are kind of there, and I should be easy to find, hopefully. Cool. But let's bring it back. You're not necessarily here to hear about me. Instead, you're more here to learn about React. So what was common about all of the projects that I completed? So there was the chat messenger application, there was this PowerPoint kind of online web form, there was creating a word cloud, and the answer is they were all front end. And most of them, they involved React, but some of them, you might have heard of other technologies. Some of them were Angular, some of them were Vue, some of them were even just raw HTML or CSS. And there was probably a bunch of other things that I used along the way. And once you talk about front end, you really end up with this kind of cloud of all of these random technologies and things that just get thrown in. We don't have time to go through every single one of these things today, but what I will say is that a lot of the time, whether you're in industry or you're running a project, a lot of your time will be spent using JavaScript or React in terms of building applications, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. I'm hoping to run through some of the basics of React and also some of the basics of JavaScript. The most modern version of JavaScript is something called ES11. Essentially, it's the same way that an iPhone or an Android works, and every year they just release a new phone. Every year they release a new version of JavaScript, and they basically add more features every year. So if I ever say ES or ES11, it's basically the newest version of JavaScript. Lucky for JavaScript, it lives in the browser. So every single time it updates, you're kind of forced upon those changes because whenever you open, for example, Canva, for example, Google, it's running some form of JavaScript as their website. And as you can see, it changes every year as well. A couple of fun facts. So JavaScript was originally created in 10 days. So there's a bit of a problem if it was created in 10 days. That seems like it's not a lot of time. Was it created properly? Who knows? It was also used in a really old browser called Netscape, which I don't think anyone would have been born to be around when Netscape was around. I wasn't either. But it's this really old browser before Internet Explorer, which is also notorious. And its original name was actually called Mocha, as in the copy. But they actually changed it because they realized that Java was a really popular language at the time. And they thought, if we copy that name, if we copy Java and we add script at the end of it, then it might be popular too. So that's what they did. They created JavaScript. They just copied the name of Java. And we ended up with JavaScript everywhere. So what is React in all of this? So React is a JavaScript framework that was created by Facebook for application front end, but it also has a bunch of other features or packages which let it interact with the back end of your projects as well. So essentially, it's just a JavaScript library which allows you to create a front end UI or something that you will see. Currently, React is the most popular library for creating a front-end application. And what we want to do today is we're going to try and develop our own application using React. By the end of the workshop, hopefully some of the skills that we learn can be used or applied to lots of scenarios. But you see here that it's vastly more popular than something like Angular or Vue, which we mentioned before. Firstly, let's take a step back. Before we had all of these fancy React frameworks, we had just simple JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And this was basically the whole project, the whole application. But nowadays, it's a lot more complicated than just having these three simple files. So perhaps a better example of this is if we go back in history and we think about something like video games. We started with games like Pac-Man, which were quite simple. We then reached things like Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario 64. Now we have some popular games. I tried to come out with the most popular game off the top of my head, and it was Valorant, because a lot of people can seem to think of it. But my main question in terms of this history of video games is, how large do you think Pac-Man is, and how large do you think React? If I created a new React project, how large would that be? So maybe answer Pac-Man first in the chat. In terms of file size. It could be just a number or any guess. 650 kilobytes. That's not a bad guess. 5 megabytes. Yeah. Cool. So the original Pac-Man was actually much smaller than those guesses. It was just 24 kilobytes. And similarly, things like Super Mario 64, 64 megabytes. And how large do we think a React project is? I don't think it's actually 24 kilobytes, but you'd be surprised. It's actually 185 megabytes. So it's quite a lot of information if you think about it. If you kind of tried to store that maybe 10, 20 years ago, you probably wouldn't be able to store that on something like a CD. But now we don't necessarily care anymore because we don't use things like CDs or even floppy disks from before. And instead, all we really care about is making something that's interactive, that users can kind of fiddle with, and they have fancy animations and things that we have via our website. So where are all of this information coming from? Where's 185 megabytes coming from? They're coming from something called node modules, which we'll look at a bit later. But essentially, node modules are what we kind of start with in order to build a React application. So what do we need to create a React application? A good place to start is something like a Google search. And if I Google search how to create a React application, it comes out with this documentation from Facebook called Use Create React App. And before we even install or create React App, the first things that it says we need all of these things on our machine. So it says node, there's npm, You need to install those before you can even create a React app. So we're not off to a great start. It doesn't look like it's very simple. What's actually happening behind the scenes? And what's the purpose of Node? So back in the day, 1997, JavaScript was introduced specifically for the browser. So if you want to modify some HTML, if you want to modify the appearance of a website, for example, if someone clicks a button that takes you to another page, you needed JavaScript. So that was back in 1997, and now it's kind of evolved since then for different reasons. You also see there that someone put a really dodgy version, and for 3 years, they kind of abandoned one of the versions, which is a bit weird, but I won't go into details of that today. Essentially, JavaScript was just specifically for the front end. But with things like Node, Node is actually more of a backend technology, which means that we can kind of use JavaScript for the whole application because we need it for the browser, but we don't necessarily need it for the backend. We could use something like C or C++ or Java or Python, but we can't use those languages to create a front-end UI. So we're kind of forced to use JavaScript. And because of that, we have this thing called Node, which is JavaScript. So Node or Node.js is just a JavaScript engine that's used to run the backend. And when I say the backend, it's basically just has access to things like the files that are on your system or your operating system. And it basically is able to run programs on your computer or some server somewhere. Actually, Node.js kind of compiles a bunch of languages together. So we do have things like C++ and C because it is backendy. But essentially, you can kind of refer to it as the JavaScript equivalent of running a backend. So why do we use JavaScript in the first place? We've kind of gone through it before. There's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the most popular language, and it's the most popular language by far. So even when you combine, for example, Python and Java, which are the next two popular languages, it's still even more popular than both of those combined. But 10, 20 years ago, it wasn't as popular as this. And one of the reasons is that we kind of use the internet a lot more than we did before. There's actually a lot of reasons as to why JavaScript has become popular. We've kind of gone through it before, but JavaScript is essentially everywhere. So whenever you're using a web browser, when you're using, for example, an app, there's probably JavaScript inside of it because it's intrinsic to, for example, accessing the internet on your phone, accessing the internet on a laptop, or even accessing the internet on something like a smartwatch. And it doesn't mean that JavaScript is the best language to use for any of this, because it's not like the best language for performance. It's not the best language to write in, but we're forced to use it because it's just present everywhere and it's kind of spread its tentacles everywhere. So now we're forced to use JavaScript, and JavaScript is used in various applications, various companies today. And we're going to talk about how to create one of those applications, a really simple version of Instagram, which is also written by Facebook, or it's owned by Facebook, but it's written in React. And if you do go to work in industry, for example, at Canva, no doubt they use React in some capacity, which we do. And so with that intro, we're going to get into some of the stuff in terms of coding and in terms of using it. Cool. So let me just switch screens. Can everyone see this screen now?
Yes.
Yep.
Cool. So in case you haven't met these two things, this is Chrome. Currently, this is not a very great page, but we have things like Google running in the background. I'm on some random website that doesn't exist, but you can ignore that for now. The left-hand side is VS Code. Really simply, VS Code is one of the main text editors which are used in industry as well. If you're not using it for some of the computer science or software engineering subjects at Monash, I definitely recommend starting to use it because it has some really cool features which will help you in terms of the way that you code, how quickly you code, and adding a bunch of tools which can help you kind of code better as well. If you want to be successful JavaScript developers, one of the main things we should probably use are JavaScript tools. And that's another reason why you should use VS Code, because it's actually one of the main open source projects which are being worked on, which use JavaScript. So we've already got kind of JavaScript running here because we have a bunch of things that we can interact with, and it's actually changing the way that we view this application. We also get a bunch of weird things, things like linting, things like changing the way that I can view a text file. For example, if I open some file and it has different syntax, it provides all of that. It's also supported by Microsoft, so it's a really large project, but that's essentially some of the reasons why we prefer to use VS Code. It also lets me run a terminal within the editor, so I don't need a separate window, which is also useful if I'm just running some simple commands, which I will be in a second. Okay, so I didn't get anyone to actually install anything, but I'm going to go through the installation process of the things that we need. To create a brand new React application, we need two basic things. So the first thing that we needed was Node. The second thing that we needed was npm. So in order to install Node, there's one simple command. You use sudo apt get install Nodejs. Nodejs we went through before. This is essentially going to help us to run a server on our own computer. And once we've installed that, we can kind of use it in order to provide information to the browser, which we can then display. If you want to check if you've already installed this before, for example, you had another project, you can always do node-b. Node is the command that we're basically running. And you can also execute JavaScript files. For example, if you had a file called hello.js, you can actually run it here, because remember that it's just a backend application, so we can run any JavaScript through it as well. And it doesn't have to touch the browser at all. So that's all Node is. As you can see here, we have a version, so I've already got it installed. Similarly, we need to install npm. And npm is simply the package manager for Node. So npm as in Node package manager. And if we want to install npm, we can write, if we want to install npm, we've already got it through Node. Node installs npm, and we need to install create React app, because we're going to run create React app in order to generate all of the files that we need. So if I do npm install -g, this just means global, and I do create React app, that's now going to install create React app on my computer. And I can also check if that's installed by doing npm create React app -v, v for version, and you can see that I have a version installed. This takes like a few minutes each, depending on how quick your machine is, but for the sake of time, they've already been installed. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next part. So create React app is another application or command. It's also created by Facebook, but essentially it just creates the skeleton of all of the files that I need to create a React application. So now if I run npx, x is for execute, but if I now run npx create, React app, and then I give it the title, my Instagram, it's going to create a whole bunch of files. As you can see, it says creating a new React app. It's got my folder. It's also installing a bunch of packages. So it's installing React. You'd kind of expect that, but it's also installing some things like React scripts. It's installing some template. And all of a sudden, if I just wait a little bit longer, twiddle your thumbs, you kind of just ignore everything that's going on until it says happy hacking. And now we can kind of say, well, we've already finished creating our React application, and it's also given us some instructions. But as soon as I've created this, it's all of a sudden made this folder inside of the kind of the workplace that I was in. And if I look inside of here, we have all of these random files. The main one that we see here is this kind of grayed out node modules. There's a few things here that we need to look at before we can start actually modifying or creating the React app. So inside of node modules, you'll see we have all of these random folders filled with files, most of which we don't know. There's bonjour. I don't think that's French. I think that's something else. We have things like arrays, a bunch of array things, array unique. Maybe you could guess what that is. But yeah, it just goes on and on and on forever. And that's what the bulk of that command was doing, was creating all of these files that all of those React packages needed. It's actually managed inside of this file called package.json. So if I go under here, and you can see here that we have a bunch of commands. You can see here that we have some versions, perhaps, of React. So 17.0.2. It's installed some other things, which we won't get into either today. But essentially, we've just got this massive package, which is used by NPM to determine what it should install inside of Node modules. We also get, by default, we get some Git, we get a Git repo. We could perhaps push that and put it up online. We could host it somewhere else, but we won't get into that today either. We also have a couple of interesting folders, which look fairly important. One of them is called public. And if we look inside of public, we have an icon, looks like the React logo. We have another React logo, and we have some HTML. So essentially, what we've got here is our main kind of folder. And inside of this main folder, we just have a body, a div, and in particular, we have this div called root. It's just got the ID of root. Nothing else is actually changed on this page, and nothing will ever change or should change in this React app. It tells us the things like this HTML file is a template. It tells us that to begin the development, run npm start, yarn start. So that's probably something we should do. It also appeared when we finished this command, like it's telling us to start the development server with yarn start. So if I cd, if I change directory into my Instagram, and I run yarn start, after a second or two, it will appear. So already, I didn't refresh or anything, but it's changed on the right-hand side. And we already have a kind of application ready to go. Inside of public, these files are actually the things that we kind of push into production. So if you were to make the next Canva, the next Facebook, you would actually end up kind of pushing all of these files onto some host, onto some server, and these files would appear somewhere online via some URL. The other main file which we'll look at from now on is source. And this is basically all of the files that we will change. There's a couple of things to note. So the main file that we get here, which we're going to focus on, is called this index.js. Index.js seems to be rendering some form of what looks like a bit like HTML. So we've got this like React strict mode. We've got something called app. And we also have document.getElement by ID root. And if you were paying attention, we saw that in index.html. Essentially, all that's happening in this file is we're rendering this app into the root element, which is inside of index, which is here. That's all that's going on. We don't even need to look at public anymore, but that's all that index.js is doing. It also has some additional stuff. It has some report web vitals. We don't actually need it, and we're not going to look into it today, but it comes just like pre-packaged with React, create React app. We can also delete this file, seeing as we're not using it. And we've kind of simplified this folder. We also have this SVG, which is actually the thing which is kind of spinning on the right already. We also have some tests, which we won't get into today. And we have some basic CSS. So if I now minimize this terminal so we can see a bit more. Oops. Cool. So CSS, all this is doing is we're just changing the appearance of different classes, different elements, which we're rendering to the page. So you see here that, for example, edit source app.js and save to reload. This is telling us that we should probably edit it, but we also have different formatting. For example, this link is appearing as blue, and some of those are defined within this app.css. So that's all that's happening in there. Otherwise, we've pretty much covered everything. Now, if we go back to index.js, we'll see here that we have this app. And we're actually importing app from surprise app. And if we open app.js, we'll see pretty much HTML. So inside of here, we've got a bunch of HTML tags. We have things like a div, a paragraph tag, an A tag, which has a link to reactjs.org. And these are everything that we can see on the right-hand side. This isn't actually HTML. So we kind of interpret this as HTML because it looks like it, but it's actually something called JSX. And they're 99% the same, but something that you would have noticed from index.js is that we were rendering something called app. An app isn't an HTML tag. It's actually a JSX element, which we're rendering inside of React DOM. But if we look inside of app.js, this is all pretty much HTML, just that we've surrounded it with these two round brackets to tell us that this is like an element that we want to return as part of this app function. Now, everything that's happening inside of here is just simply, oh, hello. It's just simply a function called app that's returning this bunch of HTML. And these are things that are just being added to the page. Okay, let me get my bearings. Cool. First thing that we see here is we want to change this file. So if I was to change, for example, edit source app.js and save to reload, what do we expect to happen? If I save this, and this might need a refresh on the first go, but you see here that we've already changed this title. So everything that we're changing within here automatically goes to whatever the browser is rendering. And from now on, if I try and save this, I no longer need to refresh my page on this side. It's automatically changing it. And that's thanks to the node, the server, which is running in the terminal below. So now, as long as I save that, everything will change on the right-hand side. That might not seem like it's a big change, but if you start doing front-end work for 30, 40 years, you could imagine that if you had to refresh every single time, it could probably take up a lot of your time just trying to refresh and refresh and refresh. So it's actually really handy in the long term. Okay, so inside of app.js, we can do all kinds of things. We have this thing which is a function. So inside of a function, we can declare different variables. For example, if I wanted to, I could have a constant. So a constant is the way that we declare a variable that isn't going to change, in which case this constant might be something like a equals 1, and it's going to be perfectly fine with that even though we're not using it. I can also do things like console logging values. This is basically just printing it. And if I try and print it, I can inspect the page by right-clicking, change this to the console, and hopefully you can kind of see it there, but we've console logged 1. So this is just acting like a function. Inside of index.js, it's just console logging 1. Not particularly useful. But you can see here that it's just behaving as a normal function. Now, what we're actually going to do is that isn't very useful. So let's just get rid of all of this except the class name app, which is the main div, and we'll just replace it with a basic heading, maybe an h2 tag, which has welcome to my Instagram. And I can get rid of the console, and you see there, it's gotten rid of all of our background, which came from some of those divs and some of those elements that we were previously rendering. So here we've kind of already built an application. It's not very useful because we just have a simple tag and it's not really interactive. We can't really do anything to change like the appearance of the website. So let's have a go at doing that now. This is a really dumb component so far, a really dumb app function, because all we've done is we're just returning something that we could have just included in HTML. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to start adding another basic component, which will render after the heading. If I just add here another function, and we're pretty much just going to copy this. So if I just copy this and save that, it's going to complain because it's going to say app has already been declared. We can see why app has already been declared because we've got app and app. So I need to change this. In this case, what we might do as a starting point is we're going to add a bunch of followers. So what I might say is we'll have something called a follow counter. And inside of this follow counter, all I want to do is have another heading, which is going to say, I have millions of followers, because maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. And nothing's appearing on the right-hand side. Why? Because we haven't actually called this function. We haven't actually used what it's returning, this h3 tag, outside of where it's declared. So we can simply do that by doing follow counter the same way that app was used in the other thing. And you'll see as soon as I save that, that we have the h3 tag, I have millions of followers appear right under that. So already we've kind of learned what JSX is. This isn't an HTML element, remember? So we're not actually rendering something like a div or a tag. Instead, we're rendering this function, which is returning some HTML or some JSX. There's no React yet in anything that we've done. We haven't used React anywhere. We haven't imported React. Let's actually import React for now. And we can do that by just doing import React. We know that React exists because we saw it in node modules. We saw it in the package JSON. And we also know that we kind of installed a create React app. So we'd expect React to be installed. And by default, it's installed via just React, the folder. Okay, this still isn't very interactive. So what if I actually wanted to change this to a number? So let's say that I have a number of followers, and if someone follows me or unfollows me, that number should change. We can kind of act as though that is a thing. Number one, we need to declare some form of a number that we want inside of this follow counter. So let's say that I have some app, and this actually stores a number of followers. We could declare that, for example, as a const and have num follows. And let's say that we start out at 0 because our app might not be very popular. Inside of the follow counter, we can actually add some parameters or some attributes, in which case I could just say something like num equals num follows. And oops, if I get the brackets right. And you'll see here that we've passed in num follows, which is actually just the value of 0, through to our follow counter. Again, this isn't particularly useful because we haven't actually done anything, but how do we actually get this num out of this kind of the things that we're passing in, the parameters within follow counter? The first thing that you would expect is we have a function, and within this function, we're probably going to be passing in some values. So let's just say for now that we've got some list of values, and what is that values going to be? So let's console log what values is. If I inspect and go to the console, we've got something called an object, and inside of this object, we have num0. So it looks like all of the things that we're passing into the follow counter are just being added as values within this object. And in order to get num out of this object, I can just do something like values.num. And if I now look at the right, we've got the value of 0. So we access those attributes by doing the dot syntax, and that gets the attribute of num from the values that we're passing in. Let's get rid of the console again. So we have this values, we can actually use it within our HTML. So rather than saying I have millions of followers, I can put these squiggly brackets and I can put in values.num. Let's get rid of the console log, seeming as we're not using it anymore. And now we've got, I have 0 followers. So we've already got this number which is being inserted. Now, if I didn't put these squiggly brackets around it, what you'd expect to happen is what happens on the right. So it's literally just copied out everything as though I have this as a string, but what we actually want is the value. And the way that we get that value and put it into this string is we use the squiggly brackets in order to do that. So now we have the actual value of 0. which we've just passed in on line 15. Okay, this still isn't very interactive. We can't increase the number of followers. We can't decrease the number of followers that we have at the moment. So let's add another function, another component. And this one could just be something like add remove follows. And as always, we want to be able to return something inside of it. And in this case, rather than actually adding some tag, what we might do is we might add some buttons. So for example, we have a simple button to add a follower and a simple button to unfollow someone. So in this case, we can add two buttons, and these are just some simple HTML tags. And we'll have one for following someone, and we'll have one for unfollowing someone. And let's just say I want to view it now. So underneath follow counter, I want to add remove follows. So down here, we add remove follows, and we end that tag with the slash greater than symbol. It's given me an error again. So what's this error? This error is saying adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you mean diamond, not diamond? Maybe that's what we meant. The actual issue that we have in this component is we're trying to render two elements, not just one. So in all of these other things, what we kind of had is inside of follow counter, we just wanted to return one H3 tag. And inside of the app, we're essentially just returning this div. So this div class name app is the only thing that's being rendered, is the only thing that's being returned. And everything inside of it is just contained within that div. But in this case, we don't actually have one element, we have two different elements, almost like an array or a list of elements. And one of the ways that we can get rid of that is we could follow the same process as app. We could add a div around both of it. And now we all of a sudden have the follow and unfollow buttons on the right-hand side. And these buttons don't do anything if I click on them, because we haven't added anything to these buttons, but they do have the content that we expect. The recommendation that it had was not actually to use a div, because this is actually rendering something. It has like an HTML tag. So if you inspect this, you'll see that there's an HTML tag surrounding the buttons. If we just use nothing inside of these brackets, this is what we call a Jsx fragment. And it's basically grouping all of these elements as though they were one. So it's saying we have a list of these HTML elements, but we actually just want a single JSX element. And that's all that we're doing with this diamond, not diamond, closing diamond tags. And this way we don't get that error coming up anymore. Okay, so inside of here, we kind of want to add some behavior, maybe something like an onClick. So an onClick is simply just an event which is going to be called whenever I click the button. So if I click the follow button and I want it to console log a value, perhaps I would put something like console log hello, and it would do console log hello. Now, we are passing in not a function, but we're actually passing in a call to a function. And in order for the HTML or the stuff that is actually rendered inside of the browser to interact, we actually need to pass in a function which has this. We have special syntax in JavaScript. If I was to replace this, I could also replace it by saying const add remove follows equals empty. And these two lines, 10 and 11, mean exactly the same thing. So essentially, they're both functions, just that the way that they're declared is a little bit different. And this syntax will look really odd if you haven't used JavaScript. But essentially, all we're saying is add remove follows is a function which is doing something, and it takes in something inside of these two parentheses. So in order to declare a function inside of this onClick, I have to do something similar. And I just have to do this in order to say, when I click the button, use this function, which is actually the full length of bracket, bracket, arrow, console log hello. And now if I do that and I inspect the page, I go to the console, every time I click follow, it's going to console log hello. And that's basically the way that we interact with something like a button. Now, I can now change this on click. So rather than doing something like this, we actually want to change this values number that we have up here. How do we change the number of the values? That's where we get a little bit tricky. So I'm going to copy this on click to the unfollow button as well. But now we kind of need add remove follows to understand what num follows is. We need to be able to set the value of num follows, but we can't actually do it here because what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up changing it. And this element won't necessarily know that it's changed because JavaScript by default can't just hold on to the value and say, when it changes, do something. In order to understand how it works, we actually need to use React. So we've imported React above. One of the main things that React has is the ability to hold a variable, and when it's set or when it's changed, it will re-render, for example, one of these components like add, remove, follow, or app once that value changes. So up here, rather than having const num follows equals 0, we can do something like const num follows equals, and we've got React, and the function that we'll use from React is called useState. Now, if you've used JavaScript for a while, this will be a little bit unfamiliar. Essentially, React has a new feature called hooks, which makes it a lot more simpler. When I use this state, we don't just have a single variable anymore, because what's actually going to happen is React is going to store whatever that value is within its state. And essentially, we can't change num follows anymore. So if I surround this with an array, useState is actually going to combine a function which is going to set the value and a variable which we can't use, we can't modify. So now if I try and do something like num follows equals num follows plus 1, it's going to give me this weird error. It's going to tell me it's constant, so I can't change it. The whole reason behind that is React needs to know whenever we are changing num follows. And the way that it knows that we're changing num follows is if we call this specific function in order to change the value which it is. So we can't do that. We actually need to use the second variable which is passed by useState function. And in order to use it inside of add remove follows, we need to pass these two values into this function, which is on line 10, right? So now if I go num equals num follows, and I say set num equals set num follows, I now need to add them as values. Now, in React, we don't actually refer to these as values because we're not just passing a set of values, but we're actually passing a set of properties. In this case, we just have a single property of num, but in this case, we have num follows. So what we can actually do is we generally call this props. So I'm going to change this up here to props as well. And we want the num and set num out of this props. So what I'll do here is we could, for example, console log them, but essentially what we have is props.num and props.setNum. Now, this is declared in an object, right? So we had an object which has props.num and props.setNum, and this is essentially set to what we call props. And this is how we kind of declared it in order to console log the values before. But we don't actually want to redeclare it. We kind of want to do the opposite. We want to be able to get num and set num out of it the same way that we did up here. But you could imagine that if we're passing things down, we don't always want to do props dot something. So we actually have a better way of doing this as well. We basically do the reverse of this because what we're saying is we want to get num and set num out of the properties. And we have our properties which are passed into add remove follows. add remove follows has num and set num, which are the parameters or the props that we're passing into this component. So now that we've got this, I can console log num and set num if I wanted to. And if I check on the right-hand side and I go to the console again, you can see we've got 0, which is the original value that we had. And we also have this weird function thing, which is literally the set num function, which we've passed in. So not particularly useful to console log. But what we can do inside of this onClick is we can call set num, which is just a function. And inside of set num, if we want to increase the number of followers we have, we want to use whatever the value of num was, and we want to increment it by 1. And we do the same thing for unfollow. Copy that function, use it down here, but we're going to do -1. And now, because we're using this set num function, inside of here, if I want to follow someone, it's now changing the value. So it's now changed to I have 8 followers. And same thing if I do unfollow, I could even have negative because it's just a number. But essentially what we have here is a dynamic kind of website. And you can do all kinds of things with these buttons. Perhaps to make it a bit more visually appealing, I'll just copy across some button CSS so we can see it a bit better. And now we have 2 buttons. If I click on unfollow, follow, we can see that each of these buttons are doing what they're intended to. Cool. So that's kind of our first interaction with use state. You see here that we've kind of got this use state and React is holding this value somewhere. We won't get into the technical details of how hooks work, but you can see that even when I'm hovering over it, it's got some documentation online, which you can also look at. But for now, we'll kind of ignore that and move on. Okay, so if we use Instagram, one of the main things that we have are things like posts. And so if I was to create a post, then within here, what would we want inside of a post? So a basic Instagram post might have some attributes, some values which are shown to the user. For example, it might have the author's name. It might have the number of likes that a post has. And it might have the thumbnail or the image that we want to display with that post. So we've got these 2 variables which we're going to send to a component that we're going to write now. And inside of each of these, we'll put in some values as well. So let's just say that this first one is maybe come at the frog, and come at the frog has 1,000 likes. And this thumbnail, we probably want to get off the internet. But in my case, I'm going to copy across a few images which I grabbed earlier. I'm just going to put them into source, the things that are lit up in green. So we have a few friends. We have Come at the Frog. We have the React app with Canva. And we have Bernie Sanders sitting in a chair. So those are our 3 images which we're going to use today. But now we need to access these images. And how do we access these images from these files? We could do something like source, because we know that it's in the directory of source. And the file name is comeatthefrog.png. So if I do comeatthefrog.png, and for now, let's get rid of that. Okay, so now we've got each of our values for our basic post. Post is not defined. That's probably an error that we want to fix. So let's create a post, and we have our props. What are our props? We have an author, likes, and thumbnail. So let me copy line 11. And here we'll have the author, the likes, and the thumbnail. And because this is post, because this is a component or a function, we need to be able to return some values, some element, which we're going to do here. And inside of this, let's use, let's say that we're going to use an H3 tag in this case, and we're going to display the author. So there we've got Kermit, which has been passed in. We also want to display a number of likes. So we'll add likes as the second variable. It's got commit 1000. So let's put the likes in brackets, and we'll add the word likes after it so we know what it's referring to. So commit 1000 likes. The one thing that we're missing is the thumbnail. Now in HTML, how do you add a thumbnail? Essentially, you just add an image, and inside of this image, you need to have a source, which could be a website, or it could be a file that we have locally. So inside of here, if I was to say add this thumbnail, then we've got that error where we can't render two elements. So we need to add that special diamond syntax for a Jsx fragment. And it's not working because it wants, okay. So I have a bit of linting, this ES lint thing, which is giving me errors because I haven't provided a specific tag. We're going to ignore that for now. So I'm going to add a comment which we don't need to look at for now, which is just going to be disabling that from this file. And we don't get an error. Okay. Now we've still got a bit of an issue because it hasn't actually displayed our file. So why is that the case? We've looked at source, but where are we actually getting source from? In order to access the current directory that we're in inside of app.js, rather than doing source, come at the frog.png, we can do / come at the frog.png, still not appearing. Why is that the case? Let's perhaps, okay, so we're passing that in, live demos. It should be the right name. Curious. What if I get rid of that little syntax? Okay, so that didn't work as we intended. What happens if I try and import it the same way that we've imported some other files? So what if, for example, I go inside of here and I now say import Kermit from /Kermit the frog.png, and then inside of here I can use that variable of Kermit. Now it works. So previously we couldn't just pass in a string because when we're actually using it as a variable inside of here, it wasn't working. Instead, we kind of had to import the file, which was just an image, but we had to import the file from our local directory using /, the same way that we get the CSS from /app.css in order to import Kermit. And we can do the same thing for the other two, which was the Canva talk and Bernie Sanders, which we might do there. And we'll use them a bit later too. So now, because we have this post component, which has Kermit and it has a bunch of other people, we can actually just copy this line and we don't need to rewrite the headings and the images. And we can post this 3 times. We can have, what was it? Monash Academy Association, and then we can have the Canva talk. And maybe this one has 999. Oh, looks like the image has gone really large. So we probably want to fix that. How do we fix that? Well, luckily we can just change this single image and it will affect all of the images that we have displayed on the right. So inside of here, we can add a width and let's set that to something like 250 and 250. And now they're all going to be the same size and it looks a bit nicer, it looks a bit more like what we would expect. The final one, we have Bernie. Maybe Bernie has 50 likes. And because we've imported it, all of a sudden he appears on the right. So now we've got our collection of 3 people. And one of the cool things about React, which you've already seen here, is we can reuse components multiple times. So the main key here is we have a bunch of posts, a bunch of components which are appearing on the page multiple times. And we can actually use the values inside of here and do a bunch of things which will affect each of it. For example, I made that mistake with the width and height, and I needed to copy that over across all of these different post elements. final thing that we want to try and do is these likes are currently pretty stagnant. And we saw before that we can have some changing values, for example, increasing and decreasing the number of followers. And that might be something that we want to do in terms of trying to, for example, simulate the number of likes a post receives. So if I go inside of here, I could change the number of likes manually. So I could go here, I could change the likes. What we might do instead is create a new component which deals with each of these likes. So I'm going to create a new component, which is just going to be a like counter, the same way that we had a follow counter from before. But this time we're not going to pass in any properties. This is just going to exist by itself. And inside of here, we're going to return another element, which is going to be something as simple as, well, what we've currently got inside of our likes is just a value and a bit of a name. So what we could do here is pop this inside of here, and it's going to tell us some weird things. It expected comma. Because this isn't an element, we need to wrap it again in some Jsx fragments. Or because we don't actually have like an element or something, we could actually put this inside of another squiggly bracket, but that's kind of a bit confusing. So let's just do that for now. And we want to render likes counter or like counter inside of here. So if we go inside of here, we have like counter. Likes is not defined. So let's do const likes equals 0. And now they're all back to 0 likes. So we've kind of gone back to the default. We saw before that we can't just use likes normally, because if we want this to change every time the value of likes changes, we have to use that useState React function. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Pretty much the same way that we used it down in the app component. We'll copy paste this, and inside of here we have likes and set likes. And now this again, it won't change. We're still at 0 likes. None of them have changed. If we wanted to change it, we could of course do something like set likes, likes plus 1. And I've broken the app already. So how have I already broken it? One of the common things that we see is if you're trying to change the value, and this is going to call set likes, it's going to increment likes by 1. It's then going to re-render this. So it's going to call the function again. It's going to say, oh, we already have a like, so we're going to create another one. We're going to increment it by 1. And we basically reached an infinite loop of rendering this like counter component. So we can't just declare likes inside of here. But let's say that we want to, for example, re-render it every 1 second. So we have this function which is going to add 1. If I go down here, inside of React, when we're actually rendering this, we saw before that if I console logged, for example, hello, that only occurs once because we're only rendering this component once. But if I start changing the value, this is going to call itself every single time we render the component, which is kind of what we want to happen. But we also only want it to happen the first time that it runs, right? Because in JavaScript, we have a function called setInterval, and setInterval calls a specific function as many times as we need, every specific number of seconds or milliseconds, and it will call itself over and over and over again until we stop it. So if I was to say inside of here that we want to set likes, and we'll do likes plus 1, and we want to call this every 1000 milliseconds or every second. So all that we're doing here is we're setting the number of likes that we have, we're incrementing it by 1, and it's going to happen once every second. Now, this is still going to cause a problem because we're going to call setInterval over and over and over again because this is calling itself over and over and over again. So we still can't use it inside of here. We actually have to bring in another hook function from React, which is called use effect. So inside of here, we have a function which is called use effect. And by default, use effect takes a function and it calls it whenever we render this component for the first time. So now if I try and let's say, get rid of this, get rid of that comment. Let's say that down here, I'm now going to, sorry, let me remove that console log. And let's say that down here, I'm going to say set likes plus 1. This is going to re-render it over and over again, but how many times am I going to console log? Whoops. So it's still going to console log multiple times because we're re-rendering this over and over again. But inside of the use effect, this function is only going to be called when I'm re-rendering the component. And I can actually specify that whenever likes changes, I want this function to occur. So if ever likes changes, we can run this function. If I don't include any variable, it's basically just going to occur the first time that I am rendering this component. I could update some values. It's only going to call it once. So inside of this use effect, I could start with that set interval function that I had from before. So what do we have? Set interval, get rid of the console log. And inside of here, we have a function which is going to call set likes plus 1. And we're going to call it once every 1,000 seconds. Now, if I refresh the page, we're now incrementing this once every second. But now something kind of funky is going on there. So if I zoom in, you can kind of see that like something really odd is going on, and we've kind of changed the likes multiple times. So why is that happening? Why is it now going nuts? Because we're still calling set interval every single time. What we actually want to happen is if we're re-rendering this component, we want to clear the interval. How do we clear the interval whenever we are removing this component? So this function is called when we're adding the component to the right-hand side, to the browser. But what happens if we're removing that component from the browser? For example, we're hiding it. We can actually do that inside of use effect by returning whatever function we want to call. In which case, we want to call something like clear interval. And what do we want to clear the interval of? We probably want to clear the interval which was set here. So let's say that we have a name associated to this, like a timer. And we want to clear the timer once we've removed the component. This doesn't affect the use state because use state is stored within React. So it's going to keep the use state. It's going to increment it slowly. This is going to say, I want to change set likes every second, and I want to remove it once I've removed the component or once I'm re-rendering it. So now if I save this and I refresh this page, which is previously going crazy, now it seems to be pretty steady. It's just incrementing by 1. I can actually change this as well, so it could be a bit more random. In JavaScript, we can write some random functions. We could do something like math.random times 100. And this will give us a random number from 0 to 100. But we've kind of got a bit of an issue because when JavaScript says a random number, it literally means any number. So now we've got some weird values going on. It still works, but we probably want a number instead. So you can do any number of things, pardon the pun, but we can literally surround it with something like number, and that will change it to an integer. So if I refresh this, oops, never mind, not number. We want to do something like the floor. So if you've done math subjects, we have something like a floor function, and the floor function will convert it to an integer. So that's kind of the main section that we've got inside of there. And now if I save that, you'll see that we've got random likes appearing on each of these posts. Now, it is kind of overriding itself already, because what we've got happening is we're kind of rendering it over and over again. We could kind of save that by changing the way that we are rendering this like counter. So this like counter is changing based on the value of likes. So we can change that by going into, so here we've got set likes. Let's try and figure out what's going on here. You can kind of see that it's not incrementing as we expect. And that's because we're setting it to this. So I've done a dummy mistake. We should be doing likes plus whatever that random value is. And that was the error there. So now these are going to increment on top of each other like we expect. The basics to understand here is that React is really as simple as adding these use state and use effect. Each of these use states are variables which are going to change throughout the component's life cycle. And use effect is going to call different functions depending on what state that component or that function is in. So you saw that this timer is kind of being introduced the first time that we load the like counter, the first time that we render it. And it clears the interval whenever we're removing that component or whenever we're not using it or hiding it, etc. And this is the basics of React. You can combine any number of these use effects. We could add all kinds of other functions as many times as we want. We could also check, for example, when I change likes, maybe we want to do something as simple as console logging what the value is. And if I do console log likes and go to inspect in the console, you see that we're console logging each of the values and it's being updated every single time that we're changing it. So this isn't going crazy. It's only doing it when it changes it in the browser. So every time that we're re-rendering, it's adding that number to the console log. And that's pretty much the basics of React. Thanks for listening that whole time. Hopefully I'm not too much over. But yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has any questions, they can ask them in the chat.
Thank you, Nathan, for that detailed tutorial on React. So now we should have a quick Q&A session. So if anyone have any questions for Nathan or even Jessica, please just send them in the chat.
Or you can feel free to unmute as well if you're comfortable doing that.
It could be React or it could be Canva related or a mixture.
If no one has a question, I have a question. I was wondering, because I saw your VS Code, Nathan, and it looks like it's fitted with a lot of tools that can be really helpful in programming.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, what's your favorite VS Code extension or tool that you use?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll be honest, a lot of these things were just part of what came with like the things that were installed by work. But I did keep a list of them to use for like personal projects and things. It's probably better if I share it separately, but essentially, yeah, like a lot of the syntax, a lot of the different colors and things that show the different syntax and where it's coming from. For example, the difference between a variable and a function, one being blue, one being yellow, are really useful. But things like that just make your life so much easier. And having the terminal inside of VS Code is probably the biggest thing that helps me, because I can kind of just get rid of it and forget about it, and it's not just running in the background.
Mm.
So there's another question for you, Nathan, from Jasmine. So she wants to know, how did you improve your skills in React outside of uni?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times it can either be ideas that you think of, or you can join kind of smaller projects, for example, with people at uni or friends who you know are somewhat interested. I think that's a good starting point. And it's a good starting point for a lot of companies. For example, if you have a bright idea like Canva, it's something that you could start, brainstorming, starting to create a basic kind of prototype, which shows, you can create a post, for example, like Instagram, and then branch out off of that to find like your niche. So I think some of that entrepreneur side kind of comes into it. Another question that I just saw come in, there's a lot of resources online which will also help you with ideas or how to use React at a more advanced scale. There's things like YouTube, there's things like all of this online documentation and things. YouTube is probably a good starting point, and it was how I kind of started. Because outside of work, I hadn't really used it, and it was something that I wanted to get into. So that was probably the best starting point that I had.
Sweet, thanks. And also a question for both Nathan and Jessica. So what are your best memories in Canva?
Over to you.
It's such a lovely question. Oh, what are my favorite memories? I think it was probably actually it's an annual favorite memory. Every time around Christmas, our kitchen staff put on a big Christmas lunch, and everyone comes and sits down. Pre-COVID, it was quite snug, and you just sat next to everyone, and they had the little what do you call it, the bonbons, and there's just like so much food, but it's really nice because you get to speak to people who you don't usually, and it's just a highlight of my year personally for work. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, so I have joined like some weird clubs. One of the big things at Canva is they have hundreds of clubs. For example, a person's name or some weird like hiking club or all kinds of things. One of the things that I joined was Messina Club. So Messina Club, ice cream, kind of expensive ice cream, but somehow they have the budget to give us all an ice cream like every week or something. So every Tuesday or like Friday, we just go to the local Messina, everyone gets an ice cream, and then we come back to the office and have a chat back and forth. So that's one of the most recent things that I've kind of joined, and like kind of brings memories because I can talk to people who I wouldn't normally.
That's pretty cool. Also, Harry asked if you guys have any tips on getting an internship at Canva.
Nathan, how did you get an internship?
That's a good question. I think a lot of times it comes down to practice, but one of the main things that I kind of recommend to a lot of students is you can be very technically capable. For example, you might know everything about JavaScript if you're doing a front-end interview, Java if you're doing a back-end interview, but when you're actually in an interview scenario with someone or some people who are talking to you, it's really difficult to be able to communicate like verbally and also doing the question or problem solving at the same time. And I think that's one of the main things that takes a lot of practice, whether that's with a group of people that you know, or providing feedback to each other in terms of like discussing a solution to some problem. And it comes really in handy when you're doing an in-person interview as well.
And Angela asks, what is the front-end interview process at Canva for the internship?
Yeah, I can provide an overview if Nathan, you wanted to add anything to it. But step one is apply. You've got to be in it to win it. It's not scary, just throw your resume in there. And then it will be an interview with our graduate recruiter, Van. She's great, she's really lovely. So she's just kind of going to get to know you a little bit, go through a few top level technical questions just to understand if the foundational knowledge is there. So don't be surprised if a recruiter starts asking you technical questions. Next stage is straight through to the final interview, where you'll have a pair programming session with either one or two interviewers. That goes for about 60 minutes. And then afterwards is our value-based interview. So this is just kind of getting to know you as a person, how you will approach different team situations, essentially just seeing if your values align with Canva's, and how you work with a team. And then fingers crossed for an offer after that. So yeah, that's the process.
Sweet. And also, Nathan, could you suggest any good sources to start learning React?
I can. I feel as though it's a lot of just searching random things that you're interested in. I remember one of the first things that I searched was how to make snake in React. So it wasn't something that I would necessarily like release or start charging money for. but it provides like that foundation of, I have this initial problem or this initial game that I want to make, and how can I make that within the browser? How can I use React? And if I have questions along the way, then things like Google are there to kind of support me and help me in terms of the things that I needed to learn along the way.
Sweet. So the last question for you is that it's more of a question on whether to balance, when you want to first learn React, I guess, did you jump straight into making projects, or did you first watch some tutorial videos? Because the problem with jumping straight into projects, you could get lost along the way, and then also you can miss out on some of the fundamental knowledges. So like, what are your tips on like balancing that, I suppose?
Yeah, so I'm not actually sure about the Monash scenario, but one of the ways that I kind of got involved was joining a project at UNSW, and it was like a uni-based project where they were building a bit of an application, and one of the things that they were using were React. And so we kind of had a few later year students or senior students who were more involved, that were able to teach, but also get you to kind of be more involved. And there's a lot of ways that that can happen. For example, things like open source projects are available online, but sometimes they can be a bit more daunting because you have people who are like 60, 70-year-olds, and they have like a lot of experience, and like they'll tell you that you're wrong in terms of doing something. So I think a lot of times it's like just like getting involved, watching like YouTube tutorials if you need to, following, I think one of the examples was Udemy. I think even things like Khan Academy, all of those websites are available. They're fairly free to use. And the internet is full of those resources that will help you learn the skills that you need as well.
Sweet. I think finally, do Mac members get extra points in the interview process for being a Mac?
I can actually say a bit of a story about the interview process. So if I'm being completely transparent, right? The first time that I applied, which was in my second year out of 4, I didn't actually like hear anything back, which was a bit sad. But then they were like, oh, make sure you apply in your penultimate year, because I applied in the wrong year. So I applied in my 3rd year, and I also had a referral from someone that I knew. So kind of a bit of interaction in events like these, even if you were, for example, to message someone on LinkedIn, message me if you want to, and you can kind of ask or give some demonstration of your skills or your projects, and get yourself through the door that way. I think that was one of the differences that I had between not getting a reply and actually going down the interview process, which was perhaps something that, helped me get the position eventually.
And on that note, Canva has signed up for the Circle Back initiative, which means every candidate that applies will get a response from someone.
I did get a response. Don't worry. It's not.
I'm just like, we're learning.
Yeah, and it's like a really young company, like still startup stage. So there's a lot of things that we're learning along the way as well. It's always changing, always crazy.
Sweet. All right, thank you. So before we wrap up, I'd like to, on behalf of Mac and everyone out here, I'd like to thank you both, Nathan and Jessica, for presenting today. I'm sure everyone learned a lot about Canva and also React. Before we leave, I would just like to ask everyone here to please take the time to fill in the feedback form so that we can provide you guys with a better event next time. Yeah, sweet.
Thank you so much for having us, Mac. This has been a blast.